Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for choosing to spend your valuable time with us this morning as we discuss how to get the wonderful product or service that you're developing into the hands of your customers. We'll start with a brief explanation of who we are and briefly review our purpose and agenda, which you read in the meetup, and then introduce our guests. As you join, I would like to ask you to please keep your mics muted until you want to ask a question or until you're ready to speak, so that we don't pick up lots of background noise. One other thing I'm going to mention now, and I might mention this again in a few minutes, is that if there are, you want to be able to connect with people through this opportunity, use the chat window to just set out your email, or I've seen people use their LinkedIn contact information if you want people to connect with you, or you want to connect with other people. So there's that. So good morning. My name is Kim Mozingo. I'm a program manager with the Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center, affectionately known as DefTech because that's a mouthful. This morning with us also is Griffin St. Louis and Gary Evans. Gary is the program director and Griffin is the program manager as well. And we are the people that help introduce businesses to the resources that are available in the DoD labs in the state of Maryland. And we help labs connect with businesses, either to license technology that they've developed in the lab, or to help the labs, help them connect with the labs to be able to use the lab resources. We are funded by the Federal Economic Development Administration, and we are a program of the Maryland Department of Commerce. I mentioned, please mute your mics, and I see people are doing that, so thank you very much. So several weeks ago, we had a meetup on product development, and we had Harbor Designs and Manufacturing come in, and they provided us with some great advice and tips on designing your product and things to think about as you're going into the product development or even prototype development. Last week at our World IP Day celebration, we touched on funding challenges a bit as we spoke with Barry Datloff, and he did a great job of explaining some of the opportunities at the Army's Medical Research and Development Command, especially for funding, some unique funding opportunities that they have. Funding, as we know, is one of the top challenges and one of the top concerns for people who are developing products and sometimes people who are developing services. So we're fortunate in the state of Maryland to have an organization called Ted Coe, which provides a host of initiatives to support Maryland businesses. And we're going to hear a little bit more about Ted Coe and what they can offer businesses in a few minutes. So before I dive into our topic, I want to let everyone know we're going to talk about this a little bit today. There's a connection from one of these to the next one, usually. The next, in 2 weeks, we're going to be hosting a meetup on the topic of understanding government reporting requirements. So when you get an SBIR and STTR award, as you'll hear later from one of our speakers, that's not where the work ends, right? That's just the beginning, and there are reporting requirements. If you decide you want to sell to the government, there are additional reporting requirements. We're also going to talk about the idea, this is in 2 weeks again, of going from being a defense contractor who provides products or services to the government to selling on the commercial market. A lot of times there's opportunity to do that, but it's not as straightforward as it would seem, and we want to make sure people understand what they're getting into if they want to make that kind of decision. So today we're going to focus on learning about 2 federal grant opportunities that can help you fund product development. Those are the STTR and SBIR programs. And we have 3 guests with us today. We have Ron Casey from Ted Coe and Feng Teo, who was a reviewer for NIH. And he also has his own business now, helping companies develop winning SBIR and STTR proposals. We also have Neo Gamo, who has started a company called Neurosonics Medical, and we'll tell you more about each one of them as it is their turn to speak. So today, as I said, we're going to focus on SBIRs and STTRs. And Ron Casey is going to kind of do an introduction and overview of what are these programs, who offers these programs, and give us some great information to help us move forward. So Ron is the perfect person to do this because he leads a Ted Coe workshop that helps people who are seeking these kinds of grants, and he will give us that overview. Ron is also, he's the director of federal programs for Ted Coe, and this does not even begin to scratch the surface of Ron's background and expertise. He has a rich and deep background in technology transfer, which is this process of moving technology from the DoD labs to the commercial market. He has an education in engineering, and he has experience working for the federal government. So he's kind of the whole package. So Ron, are you ready? Can you kick us off with some background information on Ted Coe and particularly about this wonderful SBIR workshop that you offer?
Thank you, Kim. The Ted Coe is an economic development arm of the state of Maryland, and created by the state legislature and funded by way of the governor's budget and legislature. So we're working with Maryland taxpayer dollars, and of course that means we're dedicated to supporting Maryland businesses. We start with mentoring and education all the way through pre-seed and seed funding to what we call gap or angel level funding, and then venture capital. But so it's not all just about the money. There's usually some kind of training, mentoring, networking, and everything goes along with it. This current slide has my contact information if people want to follow up at some later time on SBIR, STTR, or other topics related to federal labs or Ted Coe. I'll repeat myself here briefly. I think there's a next slide. Yeah, Ted Coe is an economic development arm of the state of Maryland, providing mentoring, networking, and support training sessions. And we also have funding that runs from pre-seed through seed, gap funding, which is angel level, up to venture capital out of the Maryland Venture Fund. One of the programs that we're running also, we get our funding primarily from the state legislature and the governor's budget, so we're dedicated and focused on Maryland businesses. But I also chase some federal dollars, and in one of those instances, we got money from the Small Business Administration for the last 2 years to run an SBIR, STTR proposal lab, where we take you from day one. I like to say we teach you how to spell SBIR all the way through 6 workshops, and at the end you actually hit submit on your proposal, and you're given a lot of guidance and direction and multiple reviews on your proposal, making it better through the workshops. Okay. So this is a good slide that we can hang on right now. These are the 11 agencies that provide SBIR funding, and the 5 that do STTR funding. So very quickly, the government is famous for its acronyms. SBIR is one of those where you have one letter for every word. So small business innovation research, SBIR, sometimes pronounced Sbir. You'll hear that from time to time. And the title tells you exactly what the program is about. It's specifically about small businesses doing innovative research, okay? It's not an engineering effort or something like that. This is typically trying to move the state of the art forward and accomplish something that hasn't been done before. Now, just so you understand, the government can be creative from time to time. STTR, there they use one letter to represent the first 2 words another letter to represent the third word, and 2 letters to represent the final word. And then you end up with a small business technology transfer. I'll go into those slightly, I'll go into those a little bit here later, differentiate them. This program has been rightfully branded as the America's Seed Fund, investing approximately $2.5 billion annually. That's the largest investment fund that I know of, and probably the largest in the world. The other nice benefit of this is it's non-diluting funds. You don't have to give up any % of your company because you accept this funding. There are 3 phases. Phase 1 is typically like $100,000 to roughly $250,000. In 2019, they raised that ceiling to $256,000 plus some change. And it's up to the individual agencies on how much they provide per award. Same thing for phase 2. There's a dollar amount. That's $750,000 typically, up to $1 million. The new ceiling is $1.7 million and change, and that's for development. At that point, you should have your technology and everything well developed, and that's where the federal government says that you should go to the private sector to get your phase 3 funding. That can also be a federal contract. Now, before I leave this, I wanted to point out a couple simple things. There's some things that the SBIR and STTR award money cannot be used for, like business development, marketing and sales efforts, intellectual property protection, so on. But if in this in the award budget, you are paying yourself as an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs often reinvest their money in their company. So there's nothing that prevents you from recycling some of the money you paid yourself back into the company to do some of those business things that need to be done. I worked with one company some years ago, and they had the phase 1. It was very successful. It was so successful, the Department of Defense offered them a contract immediately. And they were kind of concerned, do I take the contract or do I go for phase 2? Well, the obvious answer was you go to phase 3 on the contract and lock that in, and they became a government contractor based on their intellectual property. Let me point out that once you have developed intellectual property under SBIR and STTR, it is assigned to your company. You now have a sole source position on future government contracts based on that technology. So that's a very advantageous position to be in, because that's an excuse for non-competing contracts. Now, I said I would get into the difference between an SBIR and an STTR. I like to think of an STTR, the Small Business Tech Transfer Program, as an SBIR with a requirement for a nonprofit research institution partner, typically academia, but it can also be a federally funded research and development institute, maybe a research foundation. So some of the simple differences, SBIR is typically 6 months effort. STTR is 12 months. SBIR has 11 agencies offering topics, and STTR has 5. The money is the same. Under an SBIR, any intellectual property that is developed stays with the company. It becomes the intellectual property of the company. With an STTR and your research institute or academic partner, you have to have an intellectual property agreement that determines where that IP will rest. So there's one little complication with that. In the SBIR, you can have, the PI has to be with the company. The principal investigator has to be with the company. With an STTR, the principal investigator could be with the company or with the research institute. The small business, in both cases, the small businesses owns the application when it comes out. They're the ones that are expected to commercialize it and take it through phase 3. And with an SBIR, the company can have a subcontractor or doesn't need to. But if they do have a subcontractor, the company has to do 2/3 of the work and can subcontract a third. In the STTR, the company has to do at least 40% of the work, and up to 60% can go to a subcontractor or that research institute partner. So you've got a range of 30 to 60% you can do with that research entity. So it could be the company 40%, the research institute 60%, or the company 40%, the research institute 30%, and a subcontractor 30%. I mean, you can slide that scale back and forth. And another thing that I find people don't commonly know is you can morph your these programs moving from phase 1 to phase 2. So you might start with an STTIR in phase 1 and then go SBIR in phase 2, or vice versa. So that's a little trick in the game. Now, one of the questions that'll come up is whether, Kim, do you have a question?
No, it's incredibly complicated and complex. And I just wanted to point out that I'm glad Ted Coe has workshops for things like this, because it's not for the faint of heart. And we're gonna talk about that. What were you gonna say, Ron?
Some people will ask whether or not a research institute partner increases your win rate prospects. Not really, but if you have the prospect of going for an STTR and maybe you're terrible at writing proposals, an academic partner who's used to writing proposals might give you a leg up. But understand you're restricted in agencies and restricted in topics there.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, so with, partnering with an organization to help you write a good proposal is another smart strategy, as is seeking the advice and counsel of experts and people who have done this time and time again. Because we're gonna go into a little bit of the time commitment and the resource commitment to write SBIRs and STTRs. I'm curious as to what you've seen, some of the most common mistakes people make.
Yes. Thinking that an SBIR STTR program is a universal program. It's not. It is a blanket program with 11 different implementations. Okay. So you might write and apply for and win an SBIR, let's say with the Army's Medical Research and Development Command. And now you want to go and write one for NIH. Two different worlds. And what you have done with the Army program, it might have a little bit of benefit for you, but understand the format is completely different. The criteria may be different. It's, again, think of it as 11 different unique programs. Throw in the 5 from SBIR, I guess you could count STTR, you could count that as 16 different programs. Mm-hmm. And even within DOD, with the Department of Defense. You'll have an implementation that is Army, and one that's Navy, and one that is Air Force, and so on. National Institute of Standards and Technology has their program, but part of Department of Commerce is NOAA, and NOAA has its own implementation. So be careful. It's not a universal experience. The other little trick that people get involved in is complying with the requirements. This may seem trivial in some people's minds, but they give you page limits or word counts and margin sizes and font sizes. And they're very serious about you complying with these requirements. Why? Well, look at it this way. If the requirement is for a 1-inch margin and 12 font, and everybody does that except for one person, and you allow that person to have 1/2-inch margins and a 10 font, you've just allowed them to put more content into their proposal than anybody else. That, quite frankly, is considered cheating. So comply with the basics, because that is monitored and that has a reason to be strictly enforced. When you're reading the criteria that you're responding to, often a sentence will have 2 or 3 criteria in there that they want you to respond to. And I've seen people read it and then start responding up to the first one, fill up their page, and move on. And they've left 2 other items behind. I like to advise the proposal writers to lead the reviewer through what they've written. So if there's 3 criteria, put them in, respond to it in the same order. Now you got somebody reviewing who's checking off the list to see if you've answered everything. You've made it easy for them to find it. And to make it even easier, make your lead-off sentence is, criteria 1 is blah, blah, blah. And then you specifically say what you're going to do, but you have that little tag, that little phrase at the front that makes it obvious for them to find. And reviewers will go back and forth over proposals, and having that little lead in helps them find what they were looking for. I also find that techies are very strong and understand their technology, but maybe weak on the commercialization aspects or the business aspects of it. Do market research. The NSF I-Corps is a great program to do for customer discovery, but you also have access to Ted Coe's market research kiosks. We've got 3 locations in the state when life gets back to normal. In the meantime, you can contact Ted Coe, and we can arrange for you to have temporary online access to the Frost & Sullivan and the global market research databases. And these are databases that are extremely current, and you will we literally pay thousands upon thousands of dollars a year for these subscriptions, and they're available free to the Maryland startup community. And then the last thing I'll mention, when you start out with a phase 1, often the business is doing their financing on Peachtree books, Quicken books, often Excel spreadsheet. You know, they have a bookkeeper type operation. And the government understands that and accepts it. When you hit phase 2 and you're maybe getting $1 million or more from the federal government, that's when you start getting the interest of the Defense Contract Audit Agency, which is the government's audit arm. And they start expecting you to comply with the General Accounting Principles and Practices, often referred to as GAAP. And that's when you have to have auditable financial records. So just understand that as you transition from phase 1 to phase 2, you're going to have to pick up your company's financial game and take it up a level. I don't know if there's any other questions at this point.
I don't know. If anyone has a question, go ahead and feel free to put it in the chat, or just let us know if you want to just unmute yourself. This is an opportunity to do that. We're also going to have time at the end. I really appreciate your conversation, though, Ron, because I know my mental model with I hate to say it, but 40 years of experience with Department of Defense and the Air Force and working for each branch. That's my focus, and I tend to forget things like there are actually other agencies that have funding for product development. So I appreciate you mentioning those 11 agencies that are SBIRs and 5 that also offer STTRs. One of the things we're going to do, and we will put this up. Griffin, can you please show the Ted Coe slide? I'm going to try to forward these slides to everyone because there's lots of great information here and lots of great links to all these agencies, so you can learn about who's doing what. But importantly, I want to mention every year Ted Coe has the expo. So I'd hate to put you on the spot, Ron, but do you have just off the top of your head rough numbers of how many people attend and how many agencies actually present there or have a booth there? This is a not to be missed event.
Yeah, we typically have an attendance that maxes out the facility at about 1,000 participants for the annual Ted Coe Expo. You will typically have somewhere around 8 to 10 federal entities or labs represented there. And we actually set up what I call alleys on the tables. So there's a federal alley. We do have opportunity for small businesses to exhibit there. And you'll have the Maryland entrepreneur ecosystem there and some representatives from the Mid-Atlantic. A couple years ago, we actually had 2 different companies that came in from the West Coast to attend this event. So this is a great event for networking, and I'm hoping by October we're back to normal, and maybe, I don't know, if you're not shaking hands, at least fist bumping. But I'm anxious to get back to the one-on-ones.
Yeah, I know. I think we all are at this point. Want to see humans out in public without masks. Could be a while, but that's a whole nother discussion. Thank you for showing that, Griffin. So thank you.
One other thing I'd like to mention, Kim, when you share the slides,
yes,
the slide that had the agencies, I set that up so each one of them is actually a link to their SBIR sites.
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that, Ron. So what we're going to do now, you can stop presenting this slide deck, Griffin. We are going to talk to, as I mentioned, my focus is often DoD, and I tend to think less about the other agencies. I don't think less of them personally, but I don't think about that because that's not my background. But one of the things Ron mentioned that I think was incredibly important, having written and edited countless proposals for the Department of Defense, I know that the idea of building a checklist, a matrix to make sure that you're touching on all the aspects in a proposal that the agency has asked for is incredibly important. And doing those kind of nitpicky things like making sure you're using the font and the right margins and all this stuff, there's an awful lot to think about. And if you put yourself in the position of the reviewers, which we're going to get to hear from one in just a second, you understand that they're looking at so much information. They've got all of these proposals to review, all of these grant submissions to review. You don't want to do anything that's going to throw them off. So even from the standpoint of margin size, you can notice that when you're reading a lot of them that someone has tweaked a margin, whether you're looking at it on a screen or you're looking at it in, a hard copy. So those are important. And so this is a perfect segue to introduce our next set of guests, Feng Tao and Neo Gamo. So Feng was a reviewer and reviews SBIR proposals for the NIH. And you can see some great information here on his background. What he doesn't have on there is the NIH reviewing, which is critically important. It's just, we have a great opportunity to talk to somebody who's been on the other side, who's been looking at all those proposals. And so Feng is joined by Neo Gamo, who is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Neurosonics Medical. I forgot to mention, Feng does have a consulting business that he's available if you want help writing an SBIR. He's the kind of person that you can access. So Neo started Neurosonics Medical, but one of the things that's really special about her being here today, and I appreciate this, is that we're going to walk through her process of, deciding to write an SBIR grant, working in Ted Coe's workshop to get that done, and some of the things that she learned about that. So the other thing that I think is a treat is Feng and Neo presented this, just presented to Johns Hopkins University some SBIR training for people that at the university that are going to be writing grants. So this is perfect timing. And there is Neo's information about her background. So Feng, do you want to kick us off a little and talk about some of the harder stuff about writing an SBIR that we don't think about?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Kim, for introduction. I do have quite a bit of experience in the SBIR world. I must confess, since my graduate school days, I'm funded by public source of funding, from NIH, from Ted Coe, from MIPS, you name it. So I'm highly agree with Ron and Kim. For startups and for entrepreneurs, public source of funding are critical and vital in many cases. So I only want to spend a few minutes to comment from the applicant's point of view, what kind of mindset you want to set for the preparation of your proposal, because that could be equally important to know the details about these programs, how you prepare proposal. So one thing I must say, in Maryland and maybe the DMV region, we are very unique because we're surrounded by federal governments and the funding sources, and we have access to many experts in grant management, as well as applicants who have been successfully funded through this federal or local government. So it won't be difficult for you to find knowledgeable people who can help you. Like myself, and these days I'm mentoring many startups to prepare for this funding, and also in the meantime to develop their business strategies so that their SBIR funded project will be successful in the long run. That's very important. So it's not just funding a project, it's actually SBIR wants to fund you is a platform that could be potentially transform the landscape of the technological world and bring social benefits to everyone as a citizen. So one question you can ask for yourself, do I need any special skills in order to apply for SBIR grants successfully? Yes, I would say you must consider yourself could be the major challenge in this exercise when applying for grant, because you have to overcome several barrier internally in your mind, so that you can do very competitive work so that you can be outstanding among the competition. So many of you participants in this meetup today are smart people, you're entrepreneurs, and you have been successful in your career. And in terms of the competition in SBIR grant applications is that you can imagine how many of us have been gone to schools and become a professor. There are very few of them. And there's also very few of us become entrepreneur or become a leader in the industry or whatever things you're doing. And among all the grant applications, SBIR is no different from the academic grants. The success rate is about 10–15%, best maybe 20–25% for the, those proposals. So you're competing with very, very smart people around you in this country. So the competition is so severe. So be prepared. You must do a very, very outstanding work in order to be successful in those competitions. So that's very quite important. So don't take this job easily. Submitting grant is heavy lifting. You should do everything you could to make it high quality. Just Kim and Ron mentioned about the grantmanship. You cannot make mistakes. Try to avoid any like typos or the sentences must make sense. And also the flow of the content must be very well written, because you're not defending in front of people. You have to have them read your text. Those texts are the only thing you can present to those reviewers. And so must be do a very careful job. And also you must be very persistent and with intelligence. Persistent doesn't mean you kind of stone-minded. So one of the purpose to submit a grant and go through the whole process is to get your proposal peer reviewed. So you bring your idea in front of a group of people, and these are all smart people. They're highly qualified reviewers. When they look at your proposal, and does it make good sense to all these people? Maybe you have convinced yourself, but have you been able to convince all others? These people you never met before. But they have all kind of experience that might be complement to what you have. So what you want to learn is not whether your proposal is funded either successful or maybe failed. One thing you definitely will learn from is the review, the critiques. So read the critiques very carefully and try to learn new ideas out of these critiques. And if you agree and you make an improvement of your proposal next time when you resubmit, or maybe you all change the direction based on the review you brought from the exercise. And so that's what I'm saying. Because the success rate is very low, 15%, just for example, and that means statistically you submit 8 or 9 proposals, you get one winning one. So be consistent, persist on your idea, whether you really truly believe your technology will take off and bring the social benefits. That's critical. And also don't be afraid of learning from critiques from others. So put your mindset correctly and accept criticism. And SBIR is not just funding a particular project. It's funding for major technology breakthroughs that could potentially bring a new market or have a very broad impact. So the funds tend to fund those platform technologies. It is not a very unique idea. Many entrepreneurs know about this. When you have a new concept, that concept might fail. But that failure could bring other opportunities, maybe more successful than you originally thought. So SBIR is the same thing. Although you propose a project, it could be turned out to be a more broader impact technology. And yeah, as Kim and Ron mentioned, every institute funding agency has different review criteria. NIH is different from NSF. We can talk about the details later. Now I want to turn my having now to speak following me. So.
Hi, now you can go ahead and unmute your mic. I know that you guys tag team on this the workshop for Johns Hopkins. So did you have more to add to that? Or are you ready to talk about your experience?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about my experiences unless somebody has questions for Fang now.
I don't have any specific questions. Some people will want support with their an NSF COVID-19 submission. So we can get to that later. Let's see. So yes, so as I mentioned earlier, when I initially introduced Neo, we were fortunate to meet her through one of our DefTech clients, and she attended a pretty significant event we had. It was an in-person event, the last one we had in February of this year. So let me just interrupt myself real quick. Yes, we will be sharing contact information for everyone that's speaking today. That is all in the meetup. If you went through and registered in meetup, you scroll down there. We'll also share the slides, and you'll have everyone's contact information through that. And again, I'll remind people, if you want people to be able to reach out to you to connect, go ahead and put your LinkedIn or your email or whatever you feel comfortable with in the chat, because everyone will see what's in the chat as we're talking now. So as I mentioned, Neo attended this event, and then as I talked to Ron and Fang about putting this SBIR STTR opportunity together for this online session, they both said, "Hey, do you know Neo?" And I'm like, barely, but I do a little bit. And so the great thing is she just finished everything we talked about. She decided to write a grant, went through the workshop, and has worked with Fang as well. So thank you, Neo, for being here and sharing that experience with us. Can you tell us first why you decided to go after SBIR funding, and a little bit too about Neurosonics Medical, so we have a background on your status, your company?
Of course. Thank you. Oh, there's my background.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, so I'm Neo. Yep, I'm Neo Gamo. I'm co-founder and CEO of Neurosonics Medical. As Kim mentioned, we recently just received the NSF STTR Phase 1 award. So at Neurosonics Medical, we're trying to develop an ultrasound device for minimally invasive neurosurgery. We were incorporated officially in November of 2018. So as you can see, my background's actually in basic research in neuroscience. So I got my PhD in neurobiology at Yale, and then I came to Baltimore to do a postdoctoral fellowship in psychiatry at Hopkins. And then a few years ago, I had the opportunity to jump into the startup world, and so that's where I've been since, and trying to learn all this business stuff from scratch. So the reason we decided to go for grant funding is that our project was, at the time when I joined this project, it had been a research project at Hopkins for a few years, and it was just an idea, and my co-founder had just simulation data to suggest that it might work as we intended it to. And so it was way too early, it was too preliminary and risky for investors to be interested. Also, looking into what was available, it looked like there was maybe up to a couple $1 million in grant funding that was available. So that's a lot of money. That's non-dilutive, as Ron mentioned. We potentially had access to a lot of funds without having to give away equity just yet. So that's why we started with the grant funding. And also another factor was that, grant funding can take quite a number of months to actually come in. And, we were able to wait, it wasn't emergency funding. We were able to wait a bit for that funding to come in. So that's why I wanted to start with grant funding.
So with that, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull your presentation down now, sorry, so that we could just have a conversation. So how did you find out first about the SBIR lab that Ted Coe offers?
So I think I came across it in an email I might have received at some point. So when I left research, I signed up for all sorts of email lists. We actually also had one of the earliest grants that we had was a Ted Coe grant. It was the Maryland Innovation Initiative Phase 1 Award. So I think I was on the Ted Coe email list.
Perfect. Okay. And then one of the things I don't know about this, and I forgot to ask Ron, is I assume that getting into the proposal lab is a competitive process. Did you have to compete to get into the workshop, or were you just accepted into it?
I'm actually not sure if I was competing. I submitted an application.
Yeah. I assume at that point they knew who you were if you had received some funding. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, it's not obvious, but there was a down selection. We on the round that Neo was in the program. I think we had close to 100 people express interest. I think we got applications. It was up around 40 some, and we only had room in the cohort for 20. Yeah. When we went through the down select, it was hard to draw a line as to who should be in and not. And we ended up bringing 22 into an overcrowded room to try and help as many as we could. And the process worked quite well.
Well, let me ask you another quick question while you're on the screen, Ron. Did most of the people that applied for the workshop have a relationship with Ted Coe already? In other words, had they, Neo mentioned she had sought some funding and support from you prior to the SBIR workshop.
No, that was just a plus, if you will. And I did not consciously know that or look at that on the down select for who got into the cohort. Okay. It was more topic alignment and stage of technology development, and how far along the business the business team might be, even if the team was one person. And then the other thing, of course, we wrote a proposal to the SBA to get funding for this. And our proposal specifically said we would focus on, not exclusively, but we would focus on women-owned, minority, and rural businesses, because within the state of Maryland, those were categories that were not as well represented as others for SBIR applications.
I'm not surprised in knowing that Ted Coe has specific initiatives, especially for, well, there's the Women's Board, I think, and then the initiatives for rural areas. You've got all over the state. That's really important. So let me hop back to Neo and talk about your experience in the workshop, some of the challenges that you had, and what that was like for you.
Yeah, so my process of finally getting an award was actually, I think it was not a smooth journey. I think I decided initially to apply for SBIR and STTR over a year ago. And so, I came from a research background, and I had previously had, NIH funding and other grants. So writing a grant was not new to me. I'd already written and read through a lot of proposals. So I thought it would be a lot more smooth, but actually, I think over a year ago, back when the NSF had it before, they had deadlines instead of the submission windows they have now. So we actually missed the deadline because of delays with the SAM registration. And then after that, I tried to apply for the NIH STTR award. And then when we got back the scores were low enough that it wasn't even discussed. And so after that, I said, okay, I need help. And so that's when I signed up for the the SBIR Proposal Lab. And so, yeah, so I'm very grateful for that, because it really, even coming in with, a lot of grant experience in general, the Proposal Lab really transformed every section of my proposal. So it was, I think what was really helpful was that, it's easy to think that we understand the instructions just from reading it, but I had to learn, it doesn't matter how I interpret the instructions. What matters is how, what the reviewers expect to see. And so that was really helpful to learn. Also, we learned a lot of helpful tips for writing in general, like overcoming writer's block and speed writing and mind mapping techniques, which I still use for, everything else now. And also just learning from other people in the cohort. That was extremely helpful.
Okay, I love that you pointed out that it doesn't matter how you understand the instruction.
Right.
Again, it's this whole thing, and I think every organization like DevTech and Ted Coe and SBDCs just constantly pounds the businesses and entrepreneurs that we support, that understanding your customer. And in the case of writing a grant, you have a customer, and your customer is the person who's going to be reading it and reviewing it. That is so important. So thank you for mentioning that.
Right. And also, commercialization plans were completely new to me. I was never taught how to do that, and I'd never even heard of value propositions. So that was another new thing that I had to learn. And, during the proposal workshop, Ron taught us how to use the Ted Coe market research kiosk, and taught us, I'd never looked at market reports before. So it was really helpful to know, what you should pay attention to, how you should, use keywords and things like that.
That's fantastic. There's so much to get into here. But I think as listening to the three of you experts talk, I'm thinking we need to do a session just on market research. We've got to talk about the resources that are available through Ted Coe that, if you're in the state of Maryland and you have a business, should be using that. And the techniques that people learn through I-Core, that kind of lean startup, going out and talking to your customers, is something that I think we're going to want to do.
Yeah, we actually did. Another thing that I think really helped our team to eventually get an award was that we did the NSF I-Core program at the beginning of last year. And so that was really intense and time-consuming experience, but it was well worth it. Another thing that was really useful about this proposal lab was that during the course of the workshop, we had our proposals reviewed twice by SBIR reviewers, and so it was really helpful to get individualized feedback, and to be told explicitly, no, you're not, you missed this part, or you didn't quite answer this question. And actually, one of the reviewers for my proposal said that it's really obvious when a team goes through I-Core, because it changes the language that you use to describe the commercialization aspects of your technology.
That's incredibly important. Ron and I talked a little bit yesterday, and he talked about the commercialization section, and I feel like we could do a whole nother session just on a little more detail on writing an SBIR proposal, and maybe we'll do that. But so you're describing, Neo, the challenges you had getting to this point, right? So you mentioned SAM registration, which
Yes.
I know that's fun, because I had to do that for a nonprofit. I did it for my business and for a nonprofit that Gary Evans and I started, and it's just a nightmare is one way to describe it.
Yeah, when they say it takes several weeks, they're not kidding, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
No, there's not. And I did a lot of hand waving and jumping up and down and screaming, and it's to little avail, other than I guess it made me feel better. So I think that is one of the things we're going to talk about in 2 weeks on the 19th. And I haven't come up with a catchy name for our next meetup, and maybe I won't have one. But I will say that the next meetup, we're going to talk about things like, registering in SAM, and what are all these reporting requirements, because they tend to sneak up on you. You think, oh, there's money, let me go get it. But it's
Yeah.
just not that easy when you're looking at federal dollars, and that's good because there's accountability and stuff. But now you have the funding. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's that like for you now? What challenges or what are you seeing with that?
Right now, it's just everything's just kind of shut down. Luckily, we can request a no-cost extension, so we're doing what we can right now. Not being able to do much. So we got an STTR in collaboration with Johns Hopkins, and so my co-PI can't really do anything. So just trying to get the paperwork done and do what I can for now. Yeah, it actually, another aspect was that I was surprised by was how long it took for all the paperwork to go through. So yeah, so when after we submitted, a program officer a few months later came back and said, we need this additional information. And so both from the company side and also from the Hopkins side, there was just a lot of paperwork that literally took months until we finally got the award letter. The official award letter. So that was another thing that we had to deal with.
Yeah. So you need to be prepared to just move on.
Right. Yeah.
With the research that you're doing. So, well, thank you so much. I appreciate your experience, and I want to just open it up for a couple of minutes to questions. I've seen, very happy to see conversation going on in the chat. And that's great.
Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. Another thing, since we got the funding, is that there are a lot of perks that have come with this funding. It's not just the money. As because of that we got the award, we were able to participate in the NSF Beat the Odds boot camp earlier this year. So that's a customer discovery boot camp, which is like a smaller version of iCore. So this was 30 interviews over the course of a couple of months, and we had a mentor assigned to us. So we took that opportunity to explore a potential new application of our technology. So that was great, great experience. And then we were able. Later this year, I'll be participating in the commercialization planning program, which will help us to write the commercialization plan for the SBIR Phase 2 proposal that we hope to submit next year.
And who's running that? The commercialization?
Dawnbreaker.
Dawnbreaker. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I think just listening to you, I appreciate that you take the idea of customer discovery, really understanding who your customers are, so seriously, because you're doing important work that matters to, I think, all of us. So it's great to hear, and I think it's helpful for business owners, other business owners, to hear the experience firsthand of someone who's just gone through this process. So thank you so much for sharing that. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, or feel free at this point to mute ourselves. And while we're, anybody's thinking of last minute questions, I will say that I'm going to very quickly add my email, just my email address, in case somebody has a question that they didn't get answered, or you didn't get the slides. And it's very hard to talk and type at the same time. So there's my email address, which I should send out in the, it's on the information that we share in Meetup as well. So we will make sure everyone has contact information for Feng and Neo and Ron. At this point, I don't see any additional questions in there. I sincerely thank you, all of you. It has been a lot of fun working with you over the past couple of weeks to develop this program, because it doesn't come off without some planning and some work beforehand. So I appreciate the time that each of you have put into this. I do want to mention too, again, our meetup in 2 weeks. We touched on a lot this morning. This idea of what the Department of Defense in particular requires for reporting, and other federal agencies do as well. There can be a lot to it. Now, when you receive SBIR funding, it's a little less, as Ron mentioned earlier, but the more ingrained you get and the more opportunities you get, and of course you want to get to the point where you have a contract rather than just an SBIR grant award. It gets complex. So we're going to have some people on in 2 weeks to talk about that. We're going to ask you what your questions are beforehand, so think about that. And again, that will be the 19th. And
Okay.
we're going to talk about, going from commercial to defense and defense to commercial. Did you have anything else, Ron?
Yes, I'd like to loop back on a couple things very quickly. All good information, great information and everything here. And the SAM.gov, as Neo said, is a stumbling block for many. They think that the proposal is the long lead time. Well, no, actually, some of the government registrations you got to do can be a very long lead time. There was mention that the government is often looking for a platform technology. I think Fang brought that up. And that is true a lot, primarily for the civilian agencies. You get into the DoD world, again, I'm telling you, it's two different worlds. Often they are very product specific. So where the National Science Foundation might say, here's our topic area, impress me with something you can do that will advance the state of the art in whatever it is, machine learning or, biomed or whatever, okay? DOD will say, I want something that fits a box no bigger than this with, weighing no more than this amount, drawing less than this amount of power that does this for me in a certain environment. And they can be very product specific. The other thing that I didn't mention, some of these agencies, we talked about going phase 1 to phase 3 or phase 1, 2, and 3 with a government contract for your phase 3. Some of these agencies will be customers like DOD. Some of them will never be a customer like NIST or NIH. They typically are not going to buy whatever it is they help fund develop. And the last thing I'll mention, Fang hit the success rate for SBIR phase 1s. For those applying the first time that have never won before, the success rate nationally runs about 16%. Okay, up and down different agencies, but roughly 16%. The better news is when you've won a phase 1 and apply for a phase 2, now you have a limited pool of who's competing for that phase 2, and that's the bigger money. The success rate there is about 40%. So not bad odds for chasing this money.
Not too terrible. Thank you for sharing that. I think just, as I think as the four of us have talked about this, and as we do this, I've been, hastily taking notes and asking additional questions. And I'm sure some of the people who have joined us today have questions as well. So what I'm thinking is that there may be opportunity for us to go into a little more detail, which, we've talked about internally doing that. I'd want to hear from everyone who's attending today, and even people that didn't attend today but are watching this in the future. If you have specific questions, that would be helpful, would help us guide a future discussion. I can tell you that having attended some of the SBIR opportunities, for example, the Navy is local to me, and listening to, attending their workshops and listening to the experts and the people on the other side that are reviewing, one of the pieces of advice people get is, well, you need to really take advantage of the fact that you have an opportunity to speak with the topic manager before you submit. But even before that, there's also this idea of developing a relationship, inside the gate, so to speak, prior to topics being developed. So there's a whole ton more strategy and thought that we could go into, and specific tips. But I do want to hear from everyone on what your questions are. And I did put my email in the chat, so feel free to email me with additional thoughts. I'm going to go ahead and thank Ron and Fang and Neo again for giving us generously your time. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time you spent preparing for this. I'm going to say to everyone that's with us today, I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Happy Cinco de Mayo. Wash your hands, stay inside unless you have to, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. So thank you, everyone.